The tank, a game-changing weapon of war, first thundered across the trenches of the Somme in 1916. Since then, the evolution of these armored beasts has been rapid and revolutionary, especially during the 1940s, when armored warfare became a decisive element in conflicts. But what about China's journey with tanks? It wasn't until the 1950s, after enduring internal turmoil and external conflicts, that China finally began crafting its own main battle tanks. Starting from a position of playing catch-up, the Chinese defense industry has been relentless in its pursuit to advance in tank design by any means necessary. In this episode, we turn our focus to China's latest feat in armored warfare, the Type 99 main battle tank. A product of the new millennium, the Type 99 stands as a statement to China's technological leap in this field. But what do we really know about this elusive tank, given that much of the information comes from government sources and is yet to prove itself in combat? How did the Chinese tank development journey shape the Type 99? And what does the Type 99 tell us about China's current and future military capabilities? Let's delve into the past, present, and potential future of Chinese armored warfare to unravel the mysteries of the Type 99. But before we dive into the history, let's quickly refresh our understanding of the terminology when we talk about generations of tanks. This expression, used as a means of summarizing levels of technological advancement, is generally used to refer to tank development after the Second World War. The first generation of tanks are those that emerged at the tail end of the war and into the 1950s. With heavy armor and gyro-stabilized guns, usually between 105 and 125 millimeters, they became known as main battle tanks. Good examples of a first-generation tank would be the British Centurion, the Russian T-54-55, the American M48 Patton, and the Chinese Types 59 and 61. The second generation of tanks arrived between the 1950s and 80s, depending on the technological skills and resources of different nations. Here, the emphasis was on technological developments rather than necessarily bigger guns or thicker armor. Second-generation tanks were much better able to operate at night with infrared vision and were also designed to operate in nuclear, biological, or chemical war conditions. Examples of second-generation tanks include the British Chieftain, the Swedish Stridsvagn 103, the American M60 Patton, the Soviet T-62, and the Chinese Types 59 and 61. Some tanks had more advanced forms of armored protection, such as cobham armor. As the third generation of tanks emerged in the late 1980s, with advanced features like composite armor and sophisticated fire control systems, it raises a question: how did China, starting without strong industrial capabilities or tank design expertise, progress in this complex field? Where did China's journey in armored vehicle design begin, and how did it evolve over time? Without any serious industrial base and technological knowledge of tank design, Chinese tank development came slowly, piecemeal, and mainly from other countries. In the 1920s, some Chinese warlords brought a few French armored cars. In the 30s, small amounts of light armored vehicles, armored cars, and tankettes such as the Italian CV-35 and the British Carden Loyd from several countries were in the country. This presence came from different military missions as European countries began to show interest in the political and military situation in China. Advisors from the Soviet Union, Germany, and Italy were there during this time, and Chinese forces fighting the Japanese could point to a curious mix of Soviet, the T-26, German, the Panzer Mark I, and the SD-KFZ-222 armored car, Italian and British armored vehicles in their arsenal. There was no coherent doctrine for the use of these weapons, and they were generally distributed along the front line without any attempt to concentrate forces. Most were destroyed in fighting, but accessing spares and keeping the disparate pieces of equipment serviceable was another key challenge. In the early 1940s, the Chinese government was able to assemble one mechanized division, the 200th, which had a tank regiment largely equipped with the Soviet T-26 light tanks that were more or less obsolete. The division's record was patchy, defeating the Japanese in at least one major battle, but suffering massive losses in another. There does not appear to be any record of tank versus tank actions between the Japanese and Chinese forces, nor any evidence that the Chinese had even considered how a tank versus tank action might be addressed. After Pearl Harbor, with the arrival of the US into the Pacific Theater, the Americans made more concerted efforts to get military hardware to the hard-pressed Chinese forces. Plans to get 600 obsolete American T-16 light tanks to China were abandoned. Even the Chinese recognized that these were inadequate pieces of equipment. Later, the American Lend-Lease program was to provide nearly 300 M2, M3, and M5 light tanks, and even 35 M4 Shermans. The 200th Mechanized Division continued to serve in Burma under US General Stilwell, where it won 2 large battles but was ultimately crushed at the Battle for the Sipor-Magok Highway. After the Second World War, the Soviet Union provided 1,300 T-34-85 tanks for use by the People's Liberation Army, the PLA. This was a major increase in capability. Chinese factories later produced copies of the T-34 and fought battles against American forces during the Korean War. This time there was some tank-on-tank combat. A US study in 1954 calculated that there had been over 100 definite to possible tank-against-tank actions. In the mid-1950s, China began designing its own tank. What became known as the Type 59 was heavily influenced by the Soviet T-54-55 series. It was the first tank that the Chinese defense industry had ever built and was produced in great numbers, perhaps over 10,000. It was used from the 1950s to the 80s. This was a great leap forward for the Chinese defense industry, and the tank slowly upgraded with domestic improvements and some Western technology through the years of its operational life. One general and unchangeable strategic problem that China has for its own self-defense is the nature of the terrain in the south of the country. For its time, the T-59 was a heavy tank, and the south was not suitable. Boggy paddy fields, mountains, hills, and rivers were hard to negotiate. In addition, what bridges there were could not bear the weight. A lighter tank, the Type 62, was introduced in 1963. The need for lightness and mobility in a tank was always a feature that was to influence Chinese tank design. As a comparison, the Type 99 tank weighs about 58 tons, and the latest versions of the M1 Abrams weigh over 70 tons. In 1969, Soviet and Chinese forces fought a short, sharp border conflict. At one point, there were 1.5 million soldiers from both sides lining the frontier. It was a serious wake-up call for the Chinese People's Liberation Army. They realized that Chinese tanks were significantly inferior to a range of modern Soviet tanks of the period, the T-62, 64, and the 72. A captured Soviet T-62 was used as a base to copy from and enhance the T-59. This resulted in the Type 69 and later the Type 79. They were still similar to the Type 59, but they had upgrades from captured or Western technologies, but neither was particularly good. They were not the significant increase in capability that had been hoped for. Many were sold overseas instead, including to Iran and Iraq. In their favor, they were cheap, sturdy, and uncomplicated to maintain. But while they might have looked good rolling around the Victory Day parades of any puffed-up local dictator, their actual fighting capability was much open to question. The Chinese defense industry tried again. With a warming in relations between China and the West in the 1980s, China gained access to some Western military technology, particularly from the United Kingdom, which provided an advanced Marconi fire control system and a potent L7 105mm gun. It had received even more modern Western technology incorporated into the Chinese tank design, including an Austrian gun and a German engine. The Type 88 was a useful stopgap, but there were more wake-up calls. Chinese tanks exported to the Middle East had been involved in several wars: the Iran-Iraq War of 1980–88, the First Gulf War of 1991, and even the Second Gulf War in 2003. Under these testing battlefield conditions, it was demonstrated clearly that Chinese tanks were vastly inferior to pretty much every single Western main battle tank. And the news on the Soviet side was not much better. China managed to get hold of a T-72, possibly one captured by Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, and covertly handed over to China. The Chinese defense industry was learning that Western tank guns could defeat the T-72, and the T-72 could defeat all Chinese tanks. This was not a good place to be for an aspiring superpower. As a priority, China needed to produce a credible third-generation tank, and ideally also significantly upgrade its second-generation armor into the bargain. It seems that there were two schools of tank design thought within Chinese tank designers at the time. One idea was to retain the basic structure of the T-72 and build on that. The other was to take a more radical approach and lean heavily into the more modern design of the Israeli Merkava. The Merkava seems to have been a bit too progressive an option. They went for the T-72, which they had direct experience of and which had so impressed and worried them. This then was the challenge. China had not made any significant progress with the design of a main battle tank in 20 years, and what progress there had been largely dependent on Western technology or Soviet designs. Now Chinese engineers were attempting to leap from the first generation to third generation in as short a space of time as possible, A one-armed PLA veteran and tank designer Zhu Yusheng was brought out of retirement and given his mission to produce a homegrown main battle tank that could go up against the latest Western and Soviet designs. Something that could defeat a T-80 and produce a comparable performance to the Leopard 2. It was a big ask. As he noted himself, it was not as if other countries had been asleep during this time. The Type 90 was a first effort, with an attempt to make an export version for Pakistan. The designers struggled to bridge the gap in requirements. They need a tank that would work in both China's arid climate but also the blistering heat of Pakistani desert terrain. It was not successful. Another design, the Type 95, also fell by the wayside. Production was stopped in 1988 because it was not judged good enough. It was exported to Pakistan, and the designers returned to their drawing boards. As China's initial attempts with the Type 90 and Type 95 faced challenges and setbacks, what led to the development of the more successful Type 99? How did China's approach shift to meet the diverse terrain challenges and technological needs in their quest for an advanced battle tank? In 1997, a significant shift occurred with the unveiling of the Type 96, marking a step in the right direction with its lighter frame and suitability for varied terrains. The evolution continued with the Type 98's debut at a Victory Day parade in 1999, showcasing enhanced electronics and a Western-style welded turret. This progression reflects the pragmatic philosophy of Zhu Yusheng, who believed in adopting the best design elements, irrespective of their Eastern or Western origins, to achieve success. Let's delve into how these developments paved the way for the birth of the Type 99 and what made it stand out in China's tank evolution. Further enhancements were made to the Type 98, and eventually the Type 98G evolved into what we now understand as the Type 99. The Type 99 was first seen in 2000 and probably entered service in 2001. The updates to the Type 99 continued. We do not have the best sense of how many have been produced. By 2008, there may have been 200 of the Type 98 and Type 99 tanks available. At this point, it seems as if two specific tank regiments were equipped with these tanks, in Beijing and Shenyang, both in the northeast of the country, close to Mongolia, Russia, and North Korea. There have been several upgraded variants of the tank, and there may now be over 1,000 Type 99 variants in service. The bottom line is that this now seems to be a tank that the Chinese authorities are confident with and are using it as a platform for further enhancements. So let's pause there and take a look at what we now know about the original base-level capabilities of the Type 99, given that the Chinese are understandably very secretive about their weapons systems and the tank has not been used in combat anywhere. It's clear that the Type 99 is a significant move forward for the Chinese tank industry. It still seems to be based on the chassis of the T-72, although it's a full meter longer, but with major improvements to more or less every aspect of the tank design. The hull and the turret are made of welded steel. In keeping with the Chinese design over the decades, it's a mix of Western and Russian design and technologies. One of the senior designers at Norinco, the major Chinese arms producer, has described the Type 99 as China's first informationized tank. The Type 99 has a crew of 3 and mounts a stabilized 125mm smoothbore gun that can fire a Russian-style reflex anti-tank guided missile down the barrel. This missile has a range of 5 km in daylight and 4 at nighttime. 4 missiles can be carried in the tank. The secondary weapons are a coaxial 7.62 machine gun and a 12.7mm heavy machine gun on the commander's cupola. The main gun can fire APF-SDST, heat, and fragmentation rounds and can use either Warsaw Pact or Chinese ammunition. In keeping with the Soviet design, the tank has an automatic loader for the 125mm shells via a carousel located beneath the crew. This can deliver 8 rounds per minute on automatic and 1 or 2 rounds per minute when loaded manually. It carries 42 tank rounds, 22 of which can be loaded into the carousel. However, as the conflict in Ukraine has shown, Russian tanks have proven vulnerable when struck by anti-tank rounds or missiles. The carousel loader system is not well protected, and many tanks have suffered catastrophic turret explosions as a result. This is a serious problem for which there is no obvious and immediate solution. Retaining the carousel design in Chinese tanks may point to a potential weakness that could be exposed in combat. A better protected location for the ammunition and perhaps blowout panels similar to the M1 Abrams might enhance the tank's survivability. The tank has spaced modular armor, with frontal armor reportedly equivalent to 1,000 to 1,200mm of steel. The German diesel engine delivers 1,500 horsepower, giving a road speed of around 55 miles per hour. The Type 99 has a computerized fire control system, automatic fire suppression, MBC protection, and a range of countermeasures, including a laser-based self-defense weapon system, a laser warning receiver, and smoke grenades. The fire control system, rangefinder, and automatic tracker allow the tank to engage moving targets while on the move itself. Some of the Type 99 technology is believed to have been retrofitted onto the Type 96 tanks. Western assessments of the tank were mixed. Although acknowledging the Type 99 was a significant step forward, some analysts have speculated that the Type 99's fire control system might be better than that of the Russian T-90, but others have been less than impressed. Critics of the design have pointed out that some things are still lacking: protection against IEDs, roof protection, lack of blowout panels, and defense against the most modern anti-tank guided missiles. Some of these are combat lessons that Western-designed combat vehicles like the M1 Abrams have learnt the hard way. One analyst described the Type 99 as trying to force a second-generation tank into a third-generation model. But there were still improvements to come. In the mid-2000s, a new variant of the Type 99 emerged, the Type 99A. This brought a full range of further upgrades, including third-generation explosive reactive armor similar to the Russian Relict system. This could now offer protection against modern tandem anti-tank guided missiles. But it's not always clear what external changes to the tank mean, and there is always a risk in speculating. The turret has been redesigned slightly, perhaps to incorporate more internal systems, possibly including third-generation thermal sights and a digital battle management system. The tank now weighs 58 tons, against the original reported weight of 54 tons. But the 1500 horsepower engine seems to handle the weight well, giving the Type 99A considerable mobility. But understandably, accurate data about the T-99 remains a closely guarded secret. The Type 99A probably came into service in approximately 2013. By 2020, reports suggested that 840 T-99 tanks had been produced. In 2014, a combat engineering version of the Type 99 was spotted, with a crane and dozer blade fitted. There are several different Type 99 variant numbers reported by the Chinese and international media. Within these different variant numbers, there is still a certain amount of uncertainty as to which variants are which are the most up-to-date, and which are the most effective. Much of the information we have is difficult to confirm, but it does seem fair to say that a pretty significant upgrade took place when the tank moved from the base model, the Type 99, to the Type 99A. Some reports suggest that the Type 99A1 is now the most modern version of the tank. Others believe that the Type 99G is the most current. There is talk of a Type 99A2 being a much improved version, but other reports are categoric that an A2 version does not exist. Some analysts note that a Type 99 KM model is in trial. The Type 99 has yielded a simplified export variant known as the VT-1A, which has been sold to Bangladesh, Morocco, and possibly others. A newer export version, the VT-4, may emerge in time. So, what does it all boil down to? For decades, Chinese tanks have been cheap copies of old Soviet equipment, a generation or two behind what the rest of the world was doing. But several wake-up calls changed things, particularly the conflict with the Soviet Union in 1969 and the Gulf War in 1991. These events undermined Chinese confidence and showed that none of their tanks were actually any good in combat. Now, Chinese designers have worked to take what they consider the best elements from Western and Russian main battle tanks and incorporate them into tanks that will fit China's unique strategic situation and requirements. Chinese tanks are still heavily influenced by Russia and America, but they are no longer slavish, low-grade copies. The gap between Chinese and American military hardware looks to be closing. It's fair to say that the Type 99 represents a step forward in terms of approach and capabilities for Chinese main battle tank development, and the latest upgraded versions of the Type 99 also appear to have further improved the tank. Is it a match for American, European, and Russian tanks? It's hard to say with confidence, but the days of the Gulf War, with dozens of blazing Chinese copies of Soviet tanks strewn across the battlefield, are probably over. There is one crucial element that the Chinese do not have. It's combat experience. No amount of training and simulation can fully test a country's doctrine, training, logistics, morale, and fighting capability, let alone the performance of a tank and its crew. The most likely rival for the Type 99 is the M1 Abrams. In Taiwan this year, the government will start replacing their M60s with 100 Abrams. The Abrams is a heavy and old tank, but it is a reliable and robust platform that's proven itself in many different fights. It has the upgrades and enhancements that reflect this experience. it would prove a formidable opponent in defense against a Chinese ground attack. The Type 99 main battle tank is an impressive piece of equipment that represents the current peak of Chinese tank development. Whether it will stay this way for long is unclear. It's hard to say whether the Type 99 has the staying power to lead China's tank force through the next 2 decades. The needs of tank design are constantly changing. The role of the tank is being reconsidered and revised. The advent of drones over battlefields in Ukraine has caused some military analysts to declare the tank obsolete. This is almost certainly premature, but drones, improving anti-tank missiles, and the unique challenges of urban combat will ensure that Chinese tank designers are going to be kept very, very busy. Now go and check out China's brand new aircraft carrier versus USS Gerald R. Ford supercarrier, or click this other video instead.